Over the next several days, the eyes of the world will be on Rome, or specifically a chimney in the Vatican City, as large crowds gather in St. Peter's Square and billions watching worldwide eagerly await the white smoke that indicates a new pope, or Pontifex Maximus in Latin, has been chosen. The simplicity of this symbol makes it seem ancient, perhaps even dating back thousands of years to the early days of the Catholic Church itself. But in reality, the intentional creation of white smoke to commemorate a new pope only dates back to the selection of Pope Benedict XV in 1914, just over a century ago. But one aspect of this ritual with real antiquity behind it is the title Pontifex Maximus, which predates even the Christian faith, as this was the official position of the chief priest of Rome's polytheist state religion, from the origins of the city and before the very dawn of reliable history. The creed may be different, but the title has remained the same. In a society where religion and state were thoroughly intertwined, the Pontifex Maximus was a political as well as religious position, and placed the occupant at the very center of Roman religious and civic life, with the ability to regulate religious law, shape the calendar, and conduct public rites that heightened the already considerable prestige of the man who was the most distinguished member of the illustrious College of Pontiffs. These pontiffs had unique authority because they alone exercised control over a body of obscure religious and legal knowledge, giving them the ability to interpret and even alter the terms of religious practice. Unlike modern faiths, Roman religion shielded some aspects from the masses, who were not thought worthy to see behind the veil. Pontiffs alone could peek behind the curtain, giving them an air of mystery, but also unique influence. As a result, the role of the pontiffs evolved over time to become highly administrative in civic affairs, instead of simply religious in the narrow modern sense. But though the Pontifex Maximus presided over the other pontiffs, he did not have the same disciplinary powers as the popes, largely because there was no orthodox doctrine to enforce. What oversight he was able to offer came in the form of regulating moral behavior, but only within the pontifical structure, which included most notably the Vestal Virgins. However, the augurs and the cults devoted to foreign deities, as well as those of the household, were outside his purview. So we can see that, though important, he was nowhere near as central to religious practice as the Pope is to Roman Catholicism. Despite significant differences in doctrine and responsibility, there is one aspect of the Pontifex Maximus that the early Romans would recognize in the Pope: his election by co-option. This is the process by which a vacancy in the Roman religious colleges was filled by members of that college, including the Pontifex Maximus. This body alone would name the Pontifex Maximus, a process that is not unlike the modern conclave, with the College of Cardinals selecting the Pope from amongst their ranks. The exclusivity of the initial group of Roman pontiffs meant the body was unsurprisingly made up exclusively of patrician aristocrats, who clung to these positions tightly in the face of popular reformers that demanded plebeian representation in these prestigious offices. The aristocratic claim was that any innovation in the religious sphere or break from tradition would offend the gods and risk exposing Rome to their wrath. This united front even persisted until after the plebeians were able to access the consulship itself, an indication of just how valuable the pontifical offices were. However, the reformers were finally able to obtain the priesthoods through the Lex Agulnia of 300 BCE, which increased the number of pontiffs from 5 to 9, and was passed in the midst of the conflict of the orders by the tribunes of the plebs, Quintus and Gnaeus Agulnius. This seems to have been an acceptable compromise to both factions, as the next significant efforts to reform the selection of pontiffs would come nearly 200 years later with the Lex Domitia of 104. This legislation, introduced by Gaius Domitius Ahenobarbus as tribune of the plebs, transferred selection of the Pontifex Maximus from the college to the Roman people. This radical law was in line with growing popular discontent at the time, and an increasingly direct political role for the office of Pontifex Maximus. We must recall that it had been the sitting Pontifex Maximus Scipio Nasica who led the lynch mob against Tiberius Gracchus in 133. Under the terms of this new law, which gave unprecedented popular input into the conduct of Roman religion to the citizen body, the electorate would be essentially halved, with 17 of the 35 tribes chosen by lot in the Comitia Tributa. The passage of the law recognized formally that the Pontifex Maximus was a political post, something that had been long known, if not fully acknowledged. Underscoring this is the fact that the very Domitius Ahenobarbus who carried the law was elected as the next Pontifex Maximus in 103. Evidently, he was upset at having been passed over for a pontifical post by the college, and sought to join the body by popular acclaim. Whether he was passing the law on principle or through self-interest alone, we can never know. But the Roman electorate now had new abilities to shape religious life that aligned with their growing political muscle. If you're enjoying this video, please do us a favor by liking, commenting, and subscribing. We're a small channel, and this is the only way to get the almighty YouTube algorithm to notice us. Furthermore, you can help Tribunate become more sustainable by becoming a member for as little as 99 cents a month. Thank you for all of your support. This increasing influence of the masses was viewed as destabilizing by the reactionary dictator Sulla, and in 81, during his reign of terror, he voided the Lex Domitia. But, far from returning to tradition, he unilaterally named Metellus Pius as the next Pontifex Maximus, to replace Quintus Mucius Scaevola, who had been slain by Marian partisans in his purge. In independently naming the next Pontifex Maximus, Sulla was breaking with the traditions he claimed to be upholding, removing power from the people and placing it in his own person. But, like many of Sulla's reforms, this was unpopular and was rescinded after the dictator's death. By the time the office became vacant again in 63, it opened up the most famous pontifical election in Roman history, and, as fate would have it, also the last. For it was in this election that the young patrician populist Julius Caesar completed the political overhaul of the office by running a full-fledged campaign for the position. Caesar knew the stakes and was not going to let convention, or the reverence associated with the position, prevent him from using every trick in his political repertoire to carry himself to victory, even though his opponents were both more established figures that could traditionally be expected to win in such a race. Caesar was also remarkably fortunate that the position became vacant at the same time he was either in the midst of a campaign for praetor or shortly after this campaign concluded. The timing is unfortunately uncertain. What we do know is that Caesar would have spent the last several months making alliances, promises, and bribes to men of influence throughout the city, and would have been top of mind for many voters as well. This confluence of events, combined with his unrivaled skill as a politician, resulted in victory, seemingly against the odds. Caesar would occupy the position of Pontifex Maximus for the next 2 decades, leveraging the full power of the position to outmaneuver the religious objections to populist legislation made by his consular colleague Bibulus in 59. As dictator, after the Civil War, Caesar would also harness his role as Pontifex Maximus to cast himself as enjoying a particularly close relationship with the gods, and trumpet his proclaimed descent from the goddess Venus. But after the Ides of March in 44, with the position again open, it fell to Caesar's ally Lepidus, who was appointed in the settlement Antony negotiated after Caesar's death. Lepidus was not popularly elected, nor would any Pontifex Maximus ever be again, for after the passing of Lepidus in 12, the office was added to the growing list of honors held by Caesar's grandnephew and heir, Augustus. It speaks to the conservatism of Augustus and the reverence associated with the office, that, even with Lepidus increasingly marginalized within the Second Triumvirate, and Augustus emerging as the dominant force in Roman politics, the princeps never dared to strip the rightful Pontifex Maximus of his title and risk provoking the gods. But once Augustus did assume the title, it would forever be tied to the role of the emperor. In a way, the office provides a microcosm for the political development of Rome, evolving from the dominance of a small aristocratic faction to a brief period of popular electoral competition, until finally collapsing into just another symbol of imperial might. Today's Pontifex Maximus bears no connection to this ancient position, but, though the ancient Romans may not have recognized this new faith, they would doubtlessly be proud that Rome is still a global center for religious expression.